Hi everybody, I'm Ryan. Today we're going to talk about red-green Ponza in Pauper, which over the course of the past few months has risen in ranks and is either low tier 1 or high tier 2 rather than being a tier 3 weird deck. Now what we're going to do is talk about the card choices within the deck, how the deck actually works, and the overall strategy of the deck. So let's jump into it. So this is my red-green Ponza deck, and in fact I've been grinding with this deck quite a bit, and it's really fun. First off, I'm going to divide the deck into some categories because they definitely exist in different categories, so give me just a sec for that. So this Ponza deck is divided up into 4 separate categories, and it's trying to do a few different things. Number 1 is ramp. Use that ramp to be able to kill their mana, so you always have more mana than your opponent. And then play Big Dumb Idiots to finish out the game. So, the cards we're using to ramp is Utopia Sprawl and Wild Growth, meaning where we can enchant our lands so that they tap for additional mana, and then we can leverage that enchantment where the lands tap for additional mana with Arbor Elf, where it says untap target forest. So if we Wild Growth or Utopia Sprawl a forest, so it taps for an additional color. In fact, Utopia Sprawl, we can say we want this to tap for a green and a red. We can then untap it with Arbor Elf and tap it again for additional 2 mana. So with just one land with Utopia Sprawl on it and an Arbor Elf that is not summoning sick, it produces 4 mana because 2 for the original tap, untap with Arbor Elf, 2 more for the next tap. And this is true for Wild Growth as well. Now, if there are no Utopia Sprawl or Wild Growth on the lands, we can still use Arbor Elf just as like a normal mana dork as long as we have a forest. And as far as lands go, we only have one card that is not a forest in our deck, and that is a single snow-covered mountain. Now, in addition to that combo, I would call it, we have Llanowar Visionary, which when it enters the battlefield, we get to draw a card, which is dope, but is also a mana dork. It taps for a green. And then Jewel Thief, which is 3 mana, create a treasure. So it's probably our worst ramp, but it also has Vigilance and Trample. So it applies a lot of pressure while providing that treasure and ramping just a little bit, especially since we can turn 2 these with either Arbor Elf, Utopia Sprawl, or Wild Growth. So that's our ramp. Our land destruction, so that we always stay up on mana, is Thermakarst. Thermakarst is 3 mana to destroy a land. If it was a snow land, gain 1 life. And I'm gonna butcher this name. Nwanvoli? Sure. Acid Moss, which is a 4 mana sorcery, destroy target land, search your library for a forest card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So these are both land destruction. This is like a 2 mana swing actually with your opponent. But Thermakarst is really cool because you can turn to it, right? You can either play Arbor Elf or Utopia Sprawl and then super reliably turn 2 Thermakarst. If you're on the play that puts them on 0 mana, you just win. Also, these land destruction spells they're extremely good against the bounce lands. The bounce lands are super good in this format because they're a 2-color land. Taps for multiple mana, but also like makes it so you can absolutely hit your next land drop. And so we destroy those lands. It's like destroying 2 lands because it taps for 2 mana. And frankly, if you go first, your opponent's already going second and is already at a disadvantage. And then you destroy that mana that taps for 2 lands. It's like, you know what's worse than going second? Going fourth, which is effectively what that is. As kind of a side note, I mentioned you can Thermakarst on turn 2. You can do that really reliably. Also, technically, you can Acid Moss on turn 2. If you turn 1 Arbor Elf and then turn 2 second land, use that land to enchant the other untap land. Tap for 2 mana, untap, tap for 2 mana, cast Acid Moss. But that's a little bit harder to do. Thermakarst you can do incredibly reliably. And you just steal games with these cards, which is really incredible. And then once you're really ahead on mana, once your opponent sometimes can't do what they want to do, we're just going to be windmill slamming big mana cards. And these big mana cards come in a few different forms. We have Avenging Hunter, which is a 5 mana 5/4 with trample. When it enters the battlefield, you take the initiative. The initiative is that mechanic that dominated Legacy for a pretty long time, where you get to enter the dungeon, and then as long as your opponent does not deal combat damage to you, you get to keep venturing through the dungeon, which does a lot of awesome things, shown here. Which person editing my video will put it up? Love you, future Sophie. And then we're playing 2 Cascaders, one a 6/3 with Haste with Cascade for 6 mana, and one a 7 mana Reach Trample 6/5 with Cascade. Both of these are just meant to just put a ton of power and a ton of ridiculousness onto the battlefield as fast as possible and kill our opponents as fast as possible with our ramped mana, with our opponent not having a lot of mana. And then a new addition to the party is Generous End. Generous End is a 5/7 for 6, which is already fine with Reach. Enters the battlefield, create a food token. That's great. But it also has Forest Cycling. By playing 4 Generous End, not only is it another card on the top end where we can just like be jamming these cards, but also it means we can play less lands, which makes us more threat dense, which we really, really love. And then just like in a category all of its own, because it doesn't really apply to the strategy of the deck, it's pretty free to run all snowlands. So we're playing 3 Scred just to interact with our opponent just a little bit more. That being said, as far as our sideboard goes, we're playing 2 Flame Slash to deal with creatures, especially larger creatures. We're playing Gorilla Shaman for that affinity matchup. Being able to just like kill their lands for 1 mana is super dope. We're playing another new card, Cast Into the Fire. This is a 2 mana choose one. Deals 1 damage to each of up to 2 target creatures and exile target artifact. The exile artifact means we can side it in against affinity, but it's also pretty reasonable against other decks with a lot of X1s. Speaking of wiping the board, Fiery Cannonade is 3 mana instant. Deals 2 damage to each non-pirate creature. Of note though, Llanowar Visionary and Arbor Elf are non-pirates, so it will kill those. But if we're siding this in against a deck, it's normally much better against them than it is against us. Playing 2 Deglamer, choose target artifact or enchantment as owner shuffles it into their library, so it can take out those indestructible lands against affinity, also pretty good against boggles and stuff like that. And then 4 Weather the Storm. Weather the Storm is our answer to Burn, because Burn is a pretty bad matchup for us, and we really need big Weathers of Storm to win that matchup. So if you liked this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. I will definitely be doing a sideboard guide for this that's going to be posted tomorrow. Also, check me out on social medias, on Discord, on Twitter. Come interact with me. I would really, really like it. Let me know your thought in the comments. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.